Greetings, friends. You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss with you the situation in Ukraine as of November 25, 2025. A large number of very important events occurred today. And we'll start with the Zaporizhia direction. Today, several crucial pieces of news are coming from this sector. First, confirming materials have been received that the settlement of Stepnogorsk is under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It was previously reported that Ukrainian military forces pushed back the Russians and drove them out of this settlement. And for a long time, there were no confirming materials. Today, however, we received video footage confirming control over this district. But that's not all. From early this morning, information has been coming in that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to completely clear the settlement of Radosnoye, which is located slightly south of the settlement of Nechaevka in the Gulyaipol sector. This information was confirmed today both by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and by video material published by the Vostok military grouping. In these frames, we can observe how Russian units are conducting clearing operations and fighting for this settlement. Video materials came in from 3 points at once. And of course, in the final seconds of this video, we can observe several episodes of Russian soldiers raising the tricolour in two parts, in two sections of this village. One of the flags was raised in the northernmost part, the other in the central part. And here, friends, the numbers are simply impressive. The Russian army's advancement was up to 5 kilometers deep into the front line. Based on these frames, we made an adjustment, and now it's logical to assume that the Russian army is moving further along the R85 road, and at the present moment, most likely, combat operations are already underway for the settlement of Novoye Zaporizhia. Next, we move with you toward the settlement of Pokrovsk. Today, from this sector, as you can see, there are practically no interesting geolocations or video materials, but there is a lot of interesting analysis. Let's start with the fact that yesterday there was a meeting between the President of the Russian Federation and the commanders of military groupings involved in the special military operation. This meeting took place in one of the directions, and essentially all the grouping commanders presented reports on the overall situation in their assigned sectors. So according to this report, Russian units have already cleared at least 75% of the settlement of Pokrovsk. This information was precisely presented in this report. At this meeting, 75%. Yes, a very important figure, because if we look at maps from various cartographic services, Russian units' control over Pokrovsk varies from source to source, somewhere from 90 to 99%. That is, we can see that most likely the map that you're even seeing now doesn't correspond to reality. But it doesn't correspond to reality in the sense that, most likely, somewhere along the railway, possibly in the west, there is still pockets of resistance, individual blocks, micro-districts, buildings are under AFU control, where Ukrainian army units in complete encirclement are conducting some kind of circular defense. But despite this, the Russian army continues its offensive. Just yesterday, we discussed these frames published by Russian sources, and in these frames we can see how Russian soldiers are already settling into their daily life on the territory of the Shakhtarsky micro-district. This is a micro-district, albeit in the southern part of Pokrovsk, but here you can already see how daily life is gradually being established for Russian units. Today, from the southern part of Pokrovsk, this video was published, which is also being discussed throughout the network today. In these frames, we see a group of prisoners of war from the armed forces of Ukraine being led south along the road. I think I counted correctly, 14 Ukrainian soldiers are in this column. They surrendered and, accordingly, they are being taken out, most likely, toward the city of Selidovo. So that's the story unfolding in the Pokrovsk area. Next, we move with you toward the settlement of Constantinovka. Today, a large amount of news is also coming from this sector, and it's simply astounding. Again, during the meeting, during all these reports, the Commander-in-Chief of the South military grouping reported that as of the evening of September 20th, the Russian army had already cleared 4,000 residential buildings. That is, 4,000 houses, most likely, in the southern and southeastern and eastern parts of the settlement of Constantinovka, are already under full control of the Russian army. Also, according to him, Russian units are beginning to clear the central part of the city of Constantinovka, and also, according to preliminary data, According to this commander's plans, the city of Constantinovka, more precisely its major part, will be cleared by December 15th. What exactly major part means is hard to say, where the front line will run on December 15th, but this is actually a very serious statement. That is, if we assume, then by December 15th there is an extremely high probability that the front line could already run approximately along this red line. This is an approximate line, of course, but based on the words major part, perhaps it will look something like this. Also today, very important footage is coming from the territory of the settlement of Ivanopoliye. This is a settlement located slightly south of the settlement of Constantinovka. This is how the map looked as of November 20th, 2025. Today, a large number of adjustments are coming from this sector, and they're simply fantastic. 4 video materials came in at once from different points of the settlement of Ivanopoliye. We can see that we've completely colored in Ivanopoliye, based on objective control footage published by the Russian side. In these frames, we can see how units and fighters of the South military grouping are conducting clearing operations of the settlement. A large number of episodes, we won't watch them. And in the final seconds of this video, we can also observe several episodes of Russian fighters raising their banners, the banners of their units, as well as the Russian tricolor in various parts of Ivanopoliye. Here, the advancement was up to 500 meters, and based on this objective control footage, as well as the report from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, we made an adjustment. All the territory marked in red has come under full Russian control. Moreover, just recently we were talking about fierce combat operations for the settlement of Pleshchayevka, and possibly tomorrow or the day after, this settlement will also come under RF armed forces control, since all supply roads are completely cut off and taken under physical control. Next, we move with you to the Seversk-Lyman sector of the front, and here, my friends, simply incredible events are unfolding. The largest number of various adjustments are coming from here. They are very, very important and very interesting. Well, let's begin, and let's discuss everything in detail. Let's start with the settlement of Yampol. During the day, we were talking about how Yampol came under RF armed forces control, but no confirming materials had been received. And during the day, confirming materials came in from 5 points in the settlement of Yampol at once. Can you imagine, friends, from 5 different points? In these frames, we see how Russian troops are installing flags of the Russian Federation in various parts of the settlement. Here, Russian troops took Yampol under full control, completely cleared it, and all the territory marked in red came under full RF armed forces control. And here, friends, the advancement was up to 3 kilometers along the line of combat contact. Russian troops also cleared the forest area west of the settlement of Yampol. For a long time, fierce combat operations were conducted here in the forest areas north of the settlement of Yampol. Now, west of the settlement of Yampol, these forest areas were taken, and Russian troops have essentially already approached Lyman point blank. There were also reports that Varadero came under Russian control. This is not a settlement, it's a campground. And news is also coming that Russian troops are striking AFU positions in the area of the settlement of Dibrova. Possibly serious changes await us here in the coming days. Next, we move with you to the settlement of Zvanovka. Today, Ukrainian sources are publishing these frames, and in these frames we can see how Ukrainian FPV drone operators are striking units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, conducting an assault and clearing operations of Zvanovka. A large number of episodes, one of which was geolocated precisely in this place. Also today, information is coming from various pro-Russian experts that yes, indeed, the clearing of Zvanovka is already approaching some kind of completion. And based on all this data and all these reports, we made an adjustment. This is how the map looked just yesterday, November 20th. Today the map already looks like this. We can see that the Russian army managed to almost completely clear Zvanovka, and the Russian army continues its offensive. Next, we move with you slightly north to the settlement of Stavki. In the area of the settlement of Stavki, fierce combat operations were still ongoing during the day. More precisely, news was coming about fierce combat operations, and today information is coming that the Russian army managed to clear this settlement. Video materials were received from the settlement of Stavki, where Russian troops are storming the southern outskirts of this settlement and installing flags of the Russian Federation. For Stavki, the territory looked like this yesterday. This is how the map looked. Today the map already looks like this. We can see that the Russian army also cleared this settlement and is gradually moving forward. This information was confirmed today, including by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, and was also confirmed by various objective control footage, where we can see Russian soldiers raising the Russian tricolor in various parts of this settlement. There is no doubt that Stavki is currently under the full and confident control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Russian troops are now, according to reports, conducting clearing operations, demining this settlement, and will possibly move further. The situation is similar with the territory of the settlement of Novoselovka. This is how the map looked yesterday. Today adjustments are being made, according to which Russian units managed to completely clear this village. Video materials with the installation of flags of the Russian Federation came from these points. Here Russian military advanced 2 kilometers deep into the front line and took this settlement under full control. According to reports from pro-Russian sources, the settlement is completely cleared and demined. Also, news is coming from Drobyshevo. Materials are coming that confirm the Russian army's advancement. This combat operations sector came under Russian control. Just recently, video materials came from this point, where Russian fighters were taken prisoner by the AFU, and now this territory is again under Russian control. News is coming that active assault operations of the settlement of Drobyshevo are underway, which also indicates that in the near future, offensives will begin or intensify toward Drobyshevo, Yarovaya, as well as toward the settlement of Lyman itself. Moreover, Russian troops are expanding their control zone in the direction of the settlement of Alexandrovka. Here during the day, news came that attacks are underway. Strikes are being conducted on AFU positions in the area of the settlement of Alexandrovka. And this combat operations sector, marked in red, came under full Russian control today. Here the advancement was up to 4 kilometers deep into the front line. Thus, we see that Russian troops have essentially already approached the settlement of Alexandrovka and have essentially already entered it. Possibly this settlement will be taken over the weekend. That's it. Before Lyman for Russian units in certain sectors, only one settlement remains, Drobyshevo. From the north and east, there are no more obstacles. From the east, moreover, the Russian army cleared Masliakovka and is already trying to consolidate beyond Lyman itself. And as we can see, Russian troops have completely cut off supplies. In fact, Lyman is now without supplies. Assault operations of this settlement are already underway. And in the coming week, possibly within 2 weeks, serious changes await us here along the line of combat contact. That is, we can see that in this direction too, the Ukrainian side is no longer holding the front. Next, we move with you to the Kupiansk direction, from where also a huge number of various adjustments are coming. And according to, again, the West military grouping, namely yesterday, November 20th, 2025, Russian units from the West military grouping completely cleared the settlement of Kupiansk. Also, in addition to Kupiansk, Petropavlovka was also completely cleared in this direction. However, friends, an important clarification needs to be made here. Today during the day, confirming materials came in, video materials came in, it was possible to geolocate all positions, forward positions of the Russians. Video materials of the extreme points, RF armed forces positions, came in from several points in the city. Thus, we can conclude that despite the fact that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation announced that Kupiansk completely came under Russian control, this information does not quite correspond to reality in terms of 100% control. And now the forward positions are precisely in the geolocated points, where active combat operations are underway. Also, according to the General Staff, at the present moment on the territory of Kupiansk, or more precisely on the eastern side of the Oskol River, more than 10 different battalions are blocked. I think the figure is 16. And the Russian army continues combat operations and clearing of such settlements as Kurilovka, Kucherovka, and of course Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. As for the settlement of Peshanoe, controversial news is coming here that Peshanoe is still under Russian control. Now news is coming that Peshanoe is under RF armed forces control and Russian troops are moving and pressing in the direction of the settlement of Kurilovka. As soon as confirming information arrives, we will make the appropriate adjustments. Despite all the statements from the armed forces of Ukraine about stabilization of the situation, we see objective control footage and an absolutely opposite picture from what is described by Ukrainian sources. In the northeastern part of Kharkiv region, information is coming about the completion of combat operations for the settlement of Vovchansk. The Ministry of Defense, the General Staff report that as of the evening of November 20th, the Russian army has also already cleared more than 70% of this settlement, which indicates that in the coming few days, possibly weeks, this settlement too will come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And today the Kremlin commented after all on the statements of both Zelensky and the Ukrainian authorities, and the American plan, describing the entire situation, putting it literally in a few sentences. The Kremlin advises Kiev to listen to the US proposals and finally begin peace negotiations, because possibly later it will be too late. And that's all, dear friends. As you can see, today brought simply colossal changes on the front line. Russian units are advancing in practically all directions, clearing settlements one after another, and the pace of the offensive is simply astounding. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, give us your likes, and all the best to you.